Thank you for taking the time to join us on this Firefly webinar. I'm quite excited to come along tonight and present to us from Malibu in California on the biomechanical evolutionary mismatch concept. Myself and Kevin have become friends over the last period of time, as his company, Kevin Root Medical, are one of our contract fabricators. And Kevin is probably one of the most enthusiastic people I've come across with regard to producing high quality custom made foot orthoses for our patients. He's also really interested in technological advancements, and we're working closely with him to see how we can improve what we do in a digital space. So really excited, Kevin, and I think without wasting much more time, let's just press on with your presentation, and then we'll have some questions at the end. So good luck and enjoy.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Connor. Nice to see everyone coming from Malibu, California, and this is a pretty fun presentation I've put together over the years. I've trained as a surgeon, and I kind of saw that the conservative approach of treating patients either for performance or pathology with orthotics was more up my speed, and there was a big opportunity to educate young kids, to seniors and geriatrics as to how their bodies work and how orthotics, shoes, lifestyle, gait adjustment all could be improved. And this kind of left me with questions with why we're doing certain things. Growing up being semi-religious and creation being the name of the game, and then being introduced to evolution and how we've evolved over time, both in the technology that we've introduced and how our foot has evolved with how, there's dead ends in evolution. So what we really want to look at is on the left hand here, you can kind of see what the theory of evolution is. You can kind of see a progression of how we've evolved, but it's really important to know that as all animals have evolved, we've kind of gone in a certain direction and then died out or have gone extinct. And then there's survivors with different genetic backgrounds. So our genetic backgrounds go so far back. The earliest record is about 3.5 billion years with the oldest fossils of single cell organisms, which is pretty incredible to think of. Every cell in our body has some linkage back that far. Not far after, when you kind of look at the whole scale of things, the Big Bang, and essentially the creation of how physicists scale up our universe, or what we know as the universe. So about 1 billion years later, we've got these evidence of multicellular life. So there's a little coin there on the left-hand side, and there's different ways of dating things based on different lengths of time. So it's really interesting. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not an expert on that by any means. I've read and researched a little bit about it. This is one of my favorite specimens, the Tiktaalik. This is the fish that came out of the water and up and onto the mud. The theory is that it took the fins and turned them into little appendages to pull itself away from prey. They're really prominent in Canada, and around central Canada, around Hudson Bay is like where most of these specimens have been found. This is about 500 million or 500 million years ago, our Tiktaaliks. Sorry. Two different specimens here. Here's the Tiktaalik. I'm going to skip over here to about 47 million years ago, which is arboreal primates. I'm going to talk really quickly about 235 million years ago. So between the Tiktaaliks here and the mammals or the primates, we had this mass extinction with like 3/4 of all life on the planet totally wiped out by this comet hitting around Mexico. And, basically every mammal that survived this was burrowed underground. 3/4 of plant life totally wiped out. The dinosaurs wiped out. It was like one massive event that killed off a lot of life on Earth. And so we do like rat tests today and all sorts of, comparisons, because we're so closely related to rats and mice. Really any primate, our DNA is so close. And that's a whole nother topic if you start to look at orthopedics, DNA and orthopedics. Really won't get into that today, but that's something really, I think, is a global community interested in biomechanics, we should start to look at more. So let's go to about 4 million years ago, or really about 8 million years ago, is where you see Ardipithecus ramidus, which is basically going from, I'm going to back up here, going from the primate that's in trees and arboreal. So you've got grasping of both the feet and the hands and tails to balance in trees, to now all of a sudden walking upright. There's a lot of theories as to why we walk upright. I'm sure you guys have all heard of them, either to look over the grass or to conserve calories and being able to walk on 2 legs rather than 4 because resources were limited. And this all was kind of happening at this time, figure 40 million to about 10 million years ago in and around Africa. Africa was this very diverse climate and all sorts of resources for animals to live in. We'll get into that a little bit with the map. And then, from Ardipithecus ramidus, we see about Lucy is one of the most famous skeletons with his Australopithecus afarensis. And we have evidence of footprints that kind of confirm how they were walking, heel strike, mid strike, things like that. And this is about a 3 million year old specimen, Lucy, one of the most complete Australopithecus specimens found. We've got shortly thereafter in our lineage, our relatives are Homo habilis. And this is basically the closest, and you'll see that in another slide here coming up, to Homo sapiens. So Homo habilis is really kind of a blend of Homo erectus, Homo habilis, and then we have Homo sapiens, which we're only, as a species, about 200,000 years. So here's Homo erectus, and then we've got Homo heidelbergensis, this is the closest one. So I'm going to back up here, Homo habilis, and then Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis, which is basically very, very close to us. And then we have, us about 200,000 years ago. I've been fortunate enough to travel to South Africa and around Africa to look at there's like 7 points where we're, gathering evidence, caves that are close along the coast, flush with, nutrients to eat, fresh water flowing into the ocean, really kind of living around the ocean as to where humans evolved to have this big prefrontal cortex. This is an interesting slide that kind of shows the genetics and how sapiens and Neanderthals and Denisovans. So if you have black skin, you've got Denisovan in your DNA. If you have white skin, you have Neanderthal in your DNA. And there's all sorts of new fossils being found all the time. And it's really important to know that this is the Human Origins Project is wide open. There's a lot of new research and a lot of new discoveries, which is really cool. And there's a lot of resources that I can share with you if you want to stay up on top of this, podcasts, publications, institutions, one specifically in Germany, et cetera. The way that the brain evolved and omega-3 fatty acids, which is basically from what we were thinking, eating purple mussels initially about 200,000 years ago, kind of makes sense too. While seafood for young babies is so hard to consume, it's just not appealing. It's kind of one of the later things we ate in life. I mean, as far as our ancestry is concerned. But what we found is in Africa, in the southern tip of Africa, that there was a lot of evidence of cooked mussels, these purple mussels. And it was really Homo sapiens when they're still at that same time, 200,000 years ago, you had Homo Neanderthals, Homo erectus, and Homo habilis. Homo habilis being the first hominids using early Stone Age and hand axes and things to cut and process food, starting to use that brain to come up with technology to modify the environment. So this is actually a really cool slide. So if you look at the orange, where it says 200,000 years, this is where Homo sapiens were really starting to migrate along with Homo neanderthals and Homo erectus and Homo habilis all around. And then you can see how long it took to get all the way to North America. Homo sapiens have only been in North America about 12,000 years, probably around 10,000 years for South America. Getting into Eurasia, the UK about 40,000 years ago. So this is a pretty cool slide to see how we migrated. It's really interesting to think about too. We weren't necessarily walking. What a lot of the researchers are pointing to are like we're staying along the coast and staying along areas that are flush with resources. So safety from animals that we're also preying on, and also the ability to hunt those animals and to gather all the different resources for nutrition. This is an interesting question that I was presented at one point. Why did we go to snow climates, which would be so uncomfortable? And I had one researcher kind of come up and say, well, it's a lot easier to track big game in snow. So Neanderthals, who were really dominant around Eurasia, where it's a colder climate, they all have been found to be in family or tribe members of 10 people on average. All of them would fight at close range, very fast, very smart, big brains, actually bigger than ours. But what they were lacking is cooperation. So Homo sapiens, they were able to come up with ways to work together in family groups of 100. And isn't that true today? I mean, I'm presenting here essentially on the other side of the globe. We're cooperating together on one purpose. And this is really what Homo sapiens do. We cooperate as a globe. As one biologist compared us to ants. Ants being so fascinating, they work as one big colony, and really our globe is one gigantic colony now, and how we're connected with the internet. Really incredible technology. Circling back to the Neanderthals, which are extinct as of about 40,000 years ago. I kind of think that we probably, did something to get them off the planet. Probably a lot of termination on our parts, if that makes sense. So, evolutionary mismatches are really interesting. There's some that I like to briefly talk about with patients. Soft food being one. We're from an agricultural background as of the past 10,000 years, which I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard about this, and how soft food has basically changed the need for wisdom teeth being pulled, having misaligned teeth. The other thing is breastfeeding, not breastfeeding for very long. If a child breastfeeds for like 3-4 years, the teeth are really spread out, plenty of room for wisdom teeth. It's much harder to suckle on tissue than it is a latex nipple. Reading essentially looks like it was invented maybe around 10,000 years ago, where you kind of inscribe things. Now our children are born and we're given, an iPhone or a book in our face, and we have to focus, and our eyes, which have, been sensing light at a distance and looking out and about, not looking at something inscribed so close for hours on end, we get myopia. And reading glasses. So this is something that I like to talk about my patients so they understand what's going on with their bodies and their feet, and the mismatch with shoes and hard ground, which we'll further get into. Wheels being the hard ground, and we'll get that into that towards later in the presentation, some of the research of the history of roads and how roads, hard ground really is a mismatch for our 4x4 bodies. I call our bodies 4x4 because really we were built to walk through the forest on bare ground, not paved ground. And that's really the reason why we stay so busy in our clinics, is to put a piece of plastic that modifies loads to adapt bodies to a mismatched environment. So there's a lot of evidence. I'll briefly show you some of the evidence that shows, pre-agricultural, post-agricultural, how teeth were perfectly aligned until we started having processed foods or farming our foods, cooking our foods, having softer food to eat. So there's a lot of cool evidence. You can get on Google and look at all sorts of things. I've got a whole bibliography I can share with you guys that shows a lot of the research we've picked out. This is a really great one. I love this. I have ADHD myself. I have a hard time paying attention. And this is a really cool thing, that ADHD would actually be a good survival. I'm very aware of my surroundings. I have good spatial awareness. I think anyone who's into biomechanics probably has pretty good spatial awareness. You have to understand, 3D modeling, things like this, just have a good spatial intelligence, as we call it. And so it's ADHD, a trait that allows you to be aware of what's going on around you. May not be able to focus, and also ADHD, you can focus really intensively. So I thought I'd throw this in there as a pretty interesting mismatch. there's mismatches in the environment in which we're put into. The orca whales is one. We take orca whales, we put them into a tank, and that dorsal fin flops over. There's really not many muscles that go into that dorsal fin. So for whatever reason, the blood flow doesn't get up into there because they don't swim at the speeds they could or the distance that they could. But that fin, flops over so often with these orca whales that are in captivity. We have hock sores and lesions in cattle. These are cattle that are on asphalt or like not natural to their genetic code, what their bodies, and these are obviously bred cattle and things like this, but they've got this this DNA that wants to be on soft ground. This other thing, bumblefoot, which is really interesting. Chickens and birds of prey, which are kept in a I actually was in Ireland and came across this at one of the falconry schools. The birds, they have to make sure that they're putting in the cages that the birds are kept in a variety of different surfaces. Otherwise, they get repetitive stress issues on their feet. And so pretty interesting. This is a big thing called bumblefoot, how you have to treat these lesions and things, just like we do in our clinics with our patients. So getting into a little bit of the detail with the 3 stages of foot evolution, you basically have the first bipedalism. So let's kind of start with that about 8 million years ago with Ardipithecus ramidus. And then you've got Lucy, which really where the plantar fascia starts to develop. And you can kind of tell by the tubercles on the calcaneus and how it would attach to the distal end of the foot. And you get more of a propulsive lever. And then you basically have, Homo sapiens, where you've got the foot today. And you see all sorts of variations with your patients, different facets with subtalar joints, different insertion points with the posterior tibialis tendon, really all sorts of different things. This is kind of like a little linear showing exactly how we got to the Homo sapien feet. There are a lot of specimens of feet. Unfortunately, with skeletons that researchers and archaeologists or kind of paleoanthropologists are pulling out, feet are far away and usually not preserved. So it's limited with feet, but they are around, and we do have a lot of specimens where there's some great resources and a lot of holes being filled in for this type of thing. The footprints at Latoli, this is in Africa, and this is really cool. Some of the oldest footprints that came across this is Australopithecus afarensis, and kind of showed, how were we heel striking in this particular mud that they were walking across at the time, and how it was able to be preserved. And there's several footprints, but these are the oldest ones known. That shows indeed that is the way that they analyzed it. It was similar to how we walk today. This is some additional footprints that we've kind of looked at and some of the studies. I won't spend too much time on this, but I will spend time a little bit talking about, some of the trends. I don't know if you guys have seen this. This is a big deal for physios, for physical therapists in the United States, bringing together, barefoot shoes. That's something that I have to educate my patients on a lot. I personally am a big fan of barefoot shoes with orthotics sometimes, and it really just depends on the patient and what we're looking at. And so all these things that we're presenting today, when I look at patients and I look at how unique feet, knees, hips, backs are, and how they're using in the sports and the age and the health of the patient overall, we have a big job in front of us to educate the patient, provide them with shoes, provide them with orthotics. This is a really funny.
Your feet are like the car tire. They're designed to be straight, aligned, balanced, but no. Many of you, your ankles are rolled in, you have flat feet. It's like the car tire being turned in like this, causing wear and tear up the chain. The other section of you, you're rolled outwards like this, putting pressure on the outside of the top.
Oh, I guess that video stopped. Did you guys get that video?
Yeah.
I don't know why that stopped. It good. Anyway, so that this is
your feet.
I'll skip over that and basically, but in that video, there's a lot of physios that are presenting about how to train your feet, get them out of pointy shoes, get them into wider splayed shoes, into these barefoot shoes. And really, that's kind of a great thing. I like that. But one of the things that I feel like we're missing as a global community is talking about bare ground. So being in a barefoot shoe, I'm wearing a barefoot shoe right now, a Vivo barefoot shoe, and I'm walking around my house with perfectly flat floors. And it still ends up being repetitive motion because the floor is so flat. And so I like to put an orthotic in sometimes. This is me. I'm 41 years old. I'm relatively healthy. And I like to work out 6 days a week. That's not necessarily the prescription I would give to all of my patients, depending on where they are in their health. So it's really important to look at all those things and what you want to give them for treatment and what the plan is. This is a little image of what I like to sometimes show patients who are interested. They have an engineering mind of looking down the pelvis and how all of the muscles, there's about 28 muscles on one side of the pelvis to control the lower limb, what they do and how important they are and how unique everyone is, and to measure and look and see asymmetries, look at the bone relationships. What are we doing with our load modifying orthotics? Are we wearing the same orthotic all the time? Can we rotate through different orthotics? Can we use an orthotic as a training tool to increase strength and then take the orthotic away sometimes? All these things I like to think about because it's really endless possibilities with our modified environments versus the genetics that we have presented in our clinics. So this is an overview, an airplane view of the knee, about 14 muscles that originate in the knee that go into the foot. And then we've got 8 muscles that start in the foot and end in the foot, 2 on the dorsum, 6 on the plantar aspect. One thing that, Wolff's Law, if you guys have heard about this, that bones will remodel and whenever there is load being placed onto bones, but this is true for every tissue, skin, ligaments, tendons, muscles, and there's a process. And for the engineering patient, I'll tell them that it's geological, meaning that it takes a really long time to build muscle up. It takes a really long time for bone to change. I like to talk about being 13 years old and how the growth plates are just ossifying. So braces on the teeth from 11 to 13, that's the ideal age. From 13 to 25 in men and 27 in women, this is when the estrogen tapers off of 25 and 26 years old. So whatever you've been doing to your brain and your body up until that time, that's really kind of who you are for the next 75 years if you're going to live to be 100 years old. It is really easy to change and learn and grow and subject your DNA into new pathways, new growth, new ways of thinking, new ways of moving, getting that extra range of motion before you're 25. After that, the hormones in our body and the endocrine system doesn't make this process easy. It slows down. It's very, very slow after that age. That's not true for everyone. Some people, maybe it's 35. Others, it may, kick in at 18. So it's important to know that when you're talking and analyzing patients. There was this great study that looked at the posterior tibialis tendon and the variations of, 100% of the posterior tibial tendons observed will insert at the navicular. And actually 12% will insert at the calcaneus. So we've got all these mutations. And I like to tell patients, everybody's a mutation. We're all mutations of our parents, and our parents are mutations of their parents, and our parents are mutations of their parents. And it goes millions and millions and millions of generations all the way back to 3 billion years ago, if you want to go that deep in our evolutionary process. This is a real interesting video. This was shot in Australia a long time ago when the British got there, and they kind of filmed these guys barefoot. I just like watching and seeing how some are mid-strike, some are heel strikers, some are ball of the foot strikers, and not everyone's the same. And so as you do gait analysis and you see, how the patient lines up, you're just going to have your epigenetics, the way that the environment changed and loaded in development, how you're interacting with your ground, and how one person may interact with the ground different than another person. So really cool to kind of look at. This is a polished bone versus a non-polished bone. Basically an animal walking on perfectly flat surface, it's going to wear down in the femur if you don't get those squats and those movements that we were designed to do. I mean, chairs are relatively new. But historically, it looks like we didn't have chairs and we were squatting a whole lot. We don't really do that so much. We live in this world of everything's ergonomical, that the handle is right at the perfect height. Everything is at this perfect height for comfort and accessibility and things like that. But the problem is it kind of locks us into this repetitive comfort crisis that we have, where we're basically stuck in a world of overuse and repetitive tissue strain leading to pathology. You guys have heard of these guys, I'm sure, in Copper Canyon in Mexico. They wear these special sandals. They're some of the best runners. They wear these robes and they go kind of barefoot and minimal sandals like this. I love looking at their feet and kind of thinking of how my ancestors, how my relatives generally had feet like this. And then when I was in podiatry school, this is basically what I was wearing. I was wearing Aldens and fancy shoes that were presentable. And I've since then got out of these, and I'm in more of a splayed foot. But every now and then, if I have a big event and people are going to see my shoes, I'll put my shoe collection on. But it really does, even socks will compress and change the shape of my forefoot. This is a great little video. Hopefully this plays all the way through. You know, as a child, how do you treat a child, you know, that is on flat surfaces, and talking to parents about what shoes to wear. So, you know, I'm a big fan here in Southern California. We've got nice climate of getting kids barefoot and not having them in their shoes as they develop, and always wearing shoes that are as big as possible. And if someone does present, I had an 11-year-old last week present with extremely flat feet and severe pes planus. I went through some short foot exercises, got them an orthotic, taught them the orthotic is going to lift their foot up, made a fun game out of it with him. And 2 weeks later, he's presenting in his foot. He's like, look, I can hold my arch up more. And this is after going through a lot of surgeons, actually. He's really scaring the family about having massive reconstructive surgery. But he's got about 2 years. He's 11 years old. He's got 2 years where he can retrain his foot pretty easily and get into pretty good shape. Is it going to be a really high arch, a really effective runner? No, it's going to be generally flat foot. He's going to be better doing side-to-side exercises, better at swinging a golf club, better at tennis, better at basketball, anything where you can pivot like this. So I'll go through this real quick with roads. Let me just check the time here. You know, the roads were really interesting, looking at why we have this modern substrate of roads, and it really kind of points to the wheel. So about 6,000 years ago, in Mesopotamia, we have the oldest wheel on record, and right where that old wheel is, there's roads. So you can imagine we're farming for 4,000 years and carrying our bounty to a city center, maybe on a back of something. On the back of an animal, and someone says, oh, let's come up with the wheel and we'll pull a cart behind the animal. The animal can, you know, carry these resources, this bounty, more than just on the back. And so that's 6,000 years. There's evidence. This is one thing that our team could find on some ancient vehicle tracks. Really couldn't find wheels getting stuck in the mud. We're not really sure if these are wheels or not, but you can kind of imagine, okay, we have a wheel, and if you're running it, you're going to get the ruts in the mud. So we have to lay down these roads, these pavers. So this is a corduroy road, one of the oldest roads in the UK, where you would take wood and lay it down laterally like this, perpendicular to the way that the wheel would be rolling. And then you start to have some brick roads all around the world at the same time. You kind of see this technology, you know, dating back to these time periods and how roads were constructed. And then you have the drainage on the sides. So you're dealing with the environment and things like this for city centers. So really cool to think about this. It's really neat to think about Roman gladiators. Going the wrong way. Sorry about that. Let's go to, you know, our modern asphalt that we see today, and how cobblestones were okay, but then the asphalt and smoother roads makes for a much more comfortable ride. I love this slide, thinking about when I was growing up, we didn't have wheeled bags. I flew through one airport. There's an airport in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where the airport is still tiled. And so I'm dragging my suitcase and it goes back, bouncing over the tiles. But as soon as we came up with wheeled suitcases, all the big airports had to redo their floor so they didn't make that annoying clacking sound. I don't know what they're thinking in Albuquerque, but there's some pretty good studies out there too that kind of show how muscles can be used. This is a cool treadmill in a study that was done, how if you walk on this treadmill and they were measuring the activation of muscles, every time you articulate the foot on uneven surfaces, all of a sudden you're using the 28 muscles at a much higher level in your hip and your knee to stabilize the foot and stabilize the pelvis, stabilize the back. And so you can imagine if we were just walking on bare ground bipedally for 8 million years, and it's only been in 6,000 years that we've been walking on perfectly flat roads. Okay, so there's going to be a mismatch here at an orthopedic and musculoskeletal level. So there's some pretty cool studies here that kind of show overuse and things like that, and how here's a graph that actually shows how you have more use of the hip joints and the knee and the muscles at the knee, basically, with that uneven tread on the treadmill. Let's look real quickly at the shod footwear over time. This is the oldest shoe. And so basically up until 2000 years ago, any shoe that's in existence, this is the A1 shoe. It's about 5,000 years old, found in Armenia underneath a pile of sheep dung. And basically this is what is presumed, that all shoes were essentially hides sewn up like moccasins to insulate with warmth. That hay or straw that's in there, they're not sure if that's to maintain the shape or if that straw was in there to use as an insulation. But it wasn't really until the Roman gladiator that we had the technology of a stiff sole. So I like to tell patients, you have heard the Romans marched on Rome. They had this technology of taking many layers of leather and curing them and making a stiff gladiator sole. So you have what was this flexible hide, which everyone was essentially wearing up until about 2,000 years ago. And then all of a sudden putting a stiff sole that's like a propulsive lever, kind of like an original, like, you see the new running shoes today, those who are racing on these fancy shoes. I think we just had a runner that was disqualified for the shoe being too thick at a recent competition last week. I saw that come across the news flash. But all this technology and shoes really kind of started one with the warmth, with this insulating properties. We're kind of going into snow and colder climates, or areas where we had, a variation in terrain from what our foot evolved from. And I wanted to talk about this side. Trinkus did a lot of research on hammer toes and bunions. So if you can look, obviously this foot looks like it's going to have a bunion and hammer toe. And so he's done a lot of research on the phalanges and showing that those of today who have hammer toes and bunions and things like this, also that was around like 40,000 years ago when we were clothing ourselves, wrapping our feet in hides. You definitely had that pathology happen when you're modifying the foot and having it live in that environment. So here's some old military soles, different samples of old shoes. This one is really interesting. Adidas has got an interesting German history, producing a football boot. And, I've tried to find some research. I heard this at some shoe museum, I believe in Europe, that the Adidas stripes were not for the trademark of the look, but actually function. So actually they reinforced the leather with 3 stripes to hold the midfoot. So this is pretty cool. Some of the first, about 100 years ago, the German shoemaker invented this and had a pretty good result with it. There's plenty of studies that show too that if you're wearing a confined shoe, you're going to have some pathology and some deformity shown in the shoes. Why shoes are pointy. I've heard everything from, we were riding horseback and you have to slide the shoe into the stirrups, heels, because you had the royals and the elite, they wanted to stand taller. There's a lot of different reasons I think people choose shoes in the way that they do. I personally got really interested in shoes working at a REI, which is an outdoor outfitter, in high school. and I would sell the entire store, skis, sleeping bags, tents, water purifiers and filters. But the most fun I had was selling shoes. People had the most questions about their feet. They didn't understand their pain. They were going to see chiropractors. They were going to see physios, going to see podiatrists. And, it's just mind boggling when you're dealing with patients, their thought processes of what's comfortable, what they should be wearing. We all have such a different lineage, or story that we've been told as to why we should wear the shoes that we're wearing. So this is my friend Luan. I met him when I was in Hawaii. I was blown away with him. He was born in Brazil. He lived there till he was 4, and he lives on Kauai now. This is a video of him. And what was remarkable about him is that he could run on this uneven terrain and sharp rocks with not even looking at the ground. And there's very few people that can do this. I'm 41. I'm trying to do this. I live in Malibu. I've got hiking trails all around. I try and hike barefoot daily if I can. But I mean, if you look at him step on the sharp rocks, and he was standing on the lava, the hard and metamorphic rock, he has no problem. And this is just incredible. I kind of recorded this slow motion. He's leaping in the air and taking these big strides and just landing. So I think of my ancestors running through a forest for millions of years in, bare feet or hides. And we have the ability to do it. If you start at an early age, we can totally do this. Now, here's my girlfriend, or my fiance now, Lisa, who has got, hallux valgus, has bunions, cannot walk without being so light and ginger on her feet, has a real hard time. Their feet look very similar. There's actually, when you start to palpate Luan's feet versus all of my patients' feet who are in our modern environments, they're like the same. There are very little differences. You'd think they'd be tough and callous, but they're really not. They have this intrinsic strength and ability to articulate the midfoot, the mid-tarsal joints, the subtalar joint, and roll from the first to the fifth metatarsal and in between. If they come on a sharp rock, they can articulate over it, just like a Jeep would. This is that video again. I like to play this again and kind of think of all of our ancestors and where they came from, where we've come from, and what we're dealing with today. So, what we do in our clinics today, there's basically, the school of thought that I had was very much Ruschian. A lot of different leaders over the years who've come up with different theories. Kirby, Glazer, Roberta Knoll with her foot typing. And really what I've kind of come to is looking at excursions and bone structures, meaning how each bone articulates with one of the other. And I've come up with this biomechanical intelligence data sheet where I can fill this out. I actually send this back to my referring physician, and they love it. They love the fact that I'm taking numbers. Patients love that I'm measuring the breadth of the hip, how much a hip internally and externally rotates, giving them the peace of mind that it's okay to walk like a duck if their feet don't like to be toed in and they're more happy being out like this. We saw that with that videos where the Aboriginals were actually walking wide like this. That was just a mutation of the hip. There's actually a lot of great research that shows how the acetabulum and the head of the femur can be at so many different angles, along with all sorts of femoral twists, tibial torsion, and it ends up with a foot angle of progression, we call it. Where's that going to be? Is it going to be toed in? Personally, I'm toed in. I can turn my feet in much more than I can turn them out, where most people tend to actually stay straight to turned out. Measuring all these things, having a standard of measuring, not just with x-rays, CT scans, MRIs, which is kind of a standard here, but getting back to more mechanical measurement and understanding what we're dealing with and how we can modify loads and overuse pathologies with simple wedges. A 2 and 4 degree wedge, my saying is millimeters go miles. So if we're adapting a foot that has one phenotype presentation and the other one's got another phenotype, we can dial it in. If they're 60 years old, they would just want to live their life and be comfortable and play with their kids, their grandkids, get them an orthotic that basically brings their body into harmony. If they're athletic, get them a couple of orthotics they can rotate through. Tell them not to wear the orthotic all the time. Let them know that this is your optimal position where if I push on the bottom of your foot, all the load is going to be distributed all the way to their head in some balance and some harmony. And the foot is not always conducive to walking on that perfectly flat ground 10,000 steps a day. This is why we have to develop a piece of plastic to modify the foot. So you can do this, with valgus posts, varus posts. I kind of classify it in the, forefoot, midfoot, and rear foot, and all sorts of things we can do with the orthotic shell or the frames, and basically give our patients a solution to live longer and healthier and happy lives. So I think that kind of wraps it up. I didn't go about 40 minutes, but let's do a Q&A session, or any comments or concerns or questions you guys may have.
Well, just to say thank you very much, Kevin. I think you could have probably spoken for a lot longer, and it's the sort of presentation that you could probably present to any audience, because there's something there for everybody. So thank you for that. What I didn't say at the start of the webinar, and what I should have said, is that you can ask your questions, or you can pitch your questions for Kevin by using the Q&A button, either on the bottom of your screen, or it might be located at the top of your screen if you're using a smaller device like an iPad or an Android tablet. And you can stick your questions for Kevin in there, and we will answer them. Well, Kevin and Martin will field them and answer them. But just to say, while people kind of get their thoughts together and think of any questions that they might ask, Kevin, that was an incredible presentation. So we're very grateful for it. Martin, I'm sure you'd agree.
Yeah, totally fascinating. I mean, I'm just amazed at how long, say, Homo sapiens have been on planet Earth, shall we say, compared to the scale of evolution, really. I went for a hike at the weekend to Eagle Rock, which is this fantastic standing rock formation. It's about 20 minutes from where I live. And I was reading the history of it, and it's 340 million years old. And if you think about then sort of Homo sapiens, 200,000 years? I mean, it's pretty recent in the scale of evolution. Talk about the evolution of, say, the wheel, and then the manufacture of roads, and everything becomes flat. And, we constantly live on flat surfaces. And it is that repetitive motion that then creates the overload of various structures that we then see in our clinics, And then, of course, things like seating, where people get weak in the hips, weak in the glutes, weak in the core, and then you get more internal rotation. Where does that load go? Quite often through the medial side of the foot and ankle. Okay, I just see one question coming in there, and this is from Ramsey. Great stuff, Kevin. Guess you would agree that if we had all stayed as quadrupeds, we would have had a hell of a lot less back trouble.
Yeah, that's pretty. I haven't thought of that, but yeah, the quadrupeds, some of the research we've looked at have not been able to walk as far as we have. They burn like 3 times the amount of calories that we burn in the same amount of distance. And so really in Africa, as we had these clumps of resources, so you can imagine a forest, and you can imagine over thousands of years, the climate changes, as we go through climate change now, because of humans, but there has been climate change through ice ages. The forest gets bigger and smaller. And so you're having these dead ends of evolutionary processes where animals just don't have the traits to survive. And isn't that the true with families? I mean, if you, over time in history, even in human beings, you can see family lineages just die out. And that's the reality of it. And you basically have, quadrupeds, there's plenty of them around. I had a slide on another presentation that shows the number of elephants, the number of monkeys, the number of all these different animals. And there's so many more human beings than all these other animals on the planet that are primates. Basically, because we've taken over the environment and wiped them out and killed them. I mean, in California, on our flag, the state flag has a picture of a bear, but there are no bears left in Southern California. This, where I live right now, there used to be flush with bears. In fact, my house used to be a hunting cabin, and there's no bears here. We've killed them all off. So really, really kind of interesting to delve into this research and read everything that's out there.
Kevin, can I ask you a question then with regard to your philosophy in prescribing orthotic devices and their use? You talk a lot about the use of barefoot footwear, running barefoot, developing the strength. Are you constantly then trying to get your patients to move eventually out of orthoses, out of orthotic therapy, and develop more strength? So is strength and conditioning a big part of your practice?
It is. It really depends on the patient. And so we kind of need to come up with another, maybe we could do this, the presentation classifying, let's say, 5 patient profiles. So for example, I have a professional skier, JT Holmes, and he has had many injuries, and he needs the orthotics to perform. His sport is skiing. He's in a cast that's a plastic that's attached to a 2 meter, a little less than 2 meter stick, and he's sliding on snow. So the orthotic is connecting him to that equipment. And, then you've got professional runners. Just one street over here, I've got one of the best American runners. She took 4th in the LA Marathon behind the 3 Kenyan Ethiopian group. So, I watch her run, and I see her run all the time, and she is obviously in these super technology, super shoes, basically, ball. She's running super fast. She wants to dial in her performance. So she's going to want to tweak and get those wedges and that contact with the foot, with her shoe, so she can perform the best. She's dedicating her life to running. And then I've just got patients who are diabetic, overweight, and they just want to watch TV and play with their kids at the park and maybe go for a walk after dinner. And so they're going to be in an orthotic that, is probably something they don't have to think about. It's going to balance out their body. And then I've got a patient that is a yogi, a surfer, likes to walk, and maybe they ride their bikes casually. And so that's when you have like a yogi or someone who's into these unique things, this is when I kind of get into, okay, you can learn a little bit about your feet, bring the yoga just to the foot, understand how your foot works, have a series of orthotics, sometimes go without the orthotic, try and go, if you're going on a hike, when you get to the top, take your shoes and socks off and take a few steps on the bare ground. Let the ground come up and massage and articulate the foot in ways that are painful. I think it's prophylactic. If they roll themselves off of a curb by mistake in the city, but they on the weekend were a little bit barefoot, that tissue may have built itself up to have a little resistance to that, what would have been an ankle sprain or a worse ankle sprain if they had not done that. So I think loading and staying active is a key, part of my story to my patients.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. And what's interesting is the use of more than one type of device, and therefore more than one type of prescription. And of course, all of us that prescribe foot orthoses or have a special interest in it, dabble in it. So we try different products, different prescriptions, different shell materials, different cushioning materials. And what are we doing if not changing the load all the time? And I think back when I used to do a lot of running, I was running maybe six, sometimes even 7 times a week, doing half marathons, 10Ks, that type of thing. I was rotating footwear and rotating orthotic devices. And I think that's part of the secret. And I know when you came to visit, and Lisa as well, you were, wearing the barefoot running shoes. You were sometimes barefoot, you were sometimes in a shoe with an orthotic. So it's kind of an interesting concept. And I wonder if some of the delegates that are watching tonight, have they had a similar experience? I suppose the thing is, it's just the cost around prescribing multiple devices and what sort of health system funds that, or whether that's privately funded and can people afford it. But it's an interesting concept, really. And if you think about it, people are changing their shoes all the time. They're altering the loading. Yeah.
Kevin, I wonder, just a quick question. You've brought us through a journey through the millions of years there, but in your time practicing, have you seen more pathologies or certain pathologies become more frequent, you know, on a week-to-week or a month-to-month basis over time in your professional career?
That's a good question. I mean, off my cuff, I probably wouldn't have any, you know, for sure answers to say I've seen one thing more so than the other. I also think that as you enter in practice, you're going to attract patients that are like-minded to you. So those who like you, who are going to refer to you, maybe of the same age. So I think as you age, your patient population ages as well. That's not always the case. You know, is diabetes increased? Sure. You know, 10 years ago, I was running in 5 fingers and I came down on a rock and bruised the heck out of my heel. I've also was wearing some Earth Runner shoes and I tore my, just from overuse, my plantar plate, and I still kind of suffer from it. And that was like 4 years ago. And I still have some lingering pain. That being said, you know, I saw some barefoot injuries. I see people from wearing those, and you know, those trendy things. Yoga became really trendy. I see a lot of patients doing competitive yoga, which is kind of a silly thing, but I like to bring it up because, you know, you're in a yoga class and you're looking at the front, who can get this position that like, there's no way I can get in, but I'm sitting in the back trying, and all of a sudden I strain something or I do something that I shouldn't be doing. I really like, you know, measuring patients and explaining what their body's for, and pointing their bodies and putting that round peg in the round hole. That's something that I find is really kind of beneficial in the story of how I'm prescribing the orthotics as a tool. Is I want to learn about their bodies, what it's going to be good at. A sprinter is going to have a different body than a long distance runner. And a gymnast is going to have a different body than a basketball player. And so those are real big macro biomechanical markers. Like if you want to be a competitive gymnast, you better be under 5 feet, which, forgive me, I'm not sure what that is in meters, and if you want to be a basketball player, there's a 1 in 6, if you're over 6'7", there's a 1 in 6 chance you're a professional basketball player. And so that goes down really to, you know, we've got tennis going on right now, you know, who's able to, you know, play tennis so well. Like, you know, the young Spaniard, I watch him breathe. I watch his mouth open up. Carlos, you know, I'm talking about, he can get so much air in. He's like 18-year-old tennis players. Incredible watching these athletes that are just like outliers and just built incredible. They can do these things. So, you know,
quick question for you. There's another little question came in here, Kevin. Let me just send this your way. So just on that last point, if someone removes an orthotic at times, how much of the proprioceptive input do you feel we lose? And is that wise in some cases? You know, if you're taking the orthotic, I suppose the concept there is that the orthotic is actually improving the proprioceptive input. And I suppose that's the issue, is that the case, you know? And if you're changing it from multiple orthotics or to different shoes and no orthotic, is that actually improving the proprioception? Yeah.
You know, there's been some studies that have tried to answer that. I guess when I read these studies, I just think of the different patients who I try and give them a pair of orthotics. I have this one guy who loves to backpack, and I started him with, you know, he has a pretty flat foot, but he can make a really high arch, and he had all sorts of orthopedic issues. And so we started him with a pretty low orthotic, and then 30 days later, we gave him a higher one, and then we gave him a very high one. And I tried to get him to get out of that higher one, but his in his mind, he doesn't want to think about lifting up his foot. The proprioceptive feedback, is he going to, without the orthotic, right? Is he going to just collapse down on it? Or is he going to have muscle memory to externally rotate his hip, externally rotate his knee, supinate the midfoot, and walk in an appropriate way? This one patient says, Kevin, don't tell me any of this. Just give me the pill. I don't want to think about it. When I walk and I go backpacking or rucking, I just want to lose my mind and my thoughts. I don't want to have to think about how I'm walking. And then on the other side of the spectrum, I have a patient who's obsessed in how they walk. They come in and they're talking about their heel to toe strike. They've researched everything. They think they're doing this. I kind of give them some coaching, maybe do some video, show them how they can use it as a tool. take the orthotic away, and they eat it up. So I think a lot of it, the feet are attached to minds, and they're so varied, and the bodies and the brains are so varied, and what they're capable of doing is so varied. It's a really long conversation. I mean, I'm pretty fortunate. I get to spend about 50 minutes to an hour with each new patient that I see. And I think that's the case in the UK as well. You guys get to spend a fair amount of time, which is really, really great to get to know your patient, which in the United States, generally the podiatrists don't get to spend that much time, which is kind of unfortunate. So they're kind of rushed. But I don't know. I hope that answers the question about proprioceptive.
Yeah, no, very good. Yeah, and horses for courses, really. I mean, it's just there's different scenarios there. It's very complex, and if you think about it, the differences in anatomies when you talk about, say, outliers there in terms of the basketball players versus the gymnast, and you take that through all of the anatomical variations that exist, and then you add in the different sports, and then you add in the different health aspects, and then you add in age, and it just gets complex, and therefore you have to really connect into that individual patient, and you have to meet their expectations. As you said, I mean, are they attached to skis on a competitive skier, or they want them to walk the family dog, and then try and, create a treatment plan around that. Okay, listen, Kevin, we're at about an hour here, so I wanted to just thank you. Really enjoyed that, and I'm sure everybody did as well, and it'll get us all thinking about evolution and roads and evolutionary mismatches. So thanks very much, and look forward to seeing you again, Kevin, and thanks everyone for.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Thanks to the Firefly team. Thanks for having me.